Robert pushed his shopping cart down Fifth Street, the wheels squeaking with every step. The morning sun was just starting to peek through the buildings, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. He'd been living on these streets for so long, now that he couldn't remember what it felt like to sleep in a real bed. 30 years. That's how long it had been since he had a home to call his own. His hands were rough and weathered, his face marked by years of sun and cold. Most people walked past him without a second glance. That's how it was when you were homeless. You became invisible. Sometimes Robert wondered if he preferred it that way. Being invisible meant no one asked questions about who he used to be. A newspaper tumbled across the sidewalk, caught by the wind. Robert stopped it with his foot and picked it up. The headline caught his eye. Something about old properties being demolished to make way for new development. He almost threw it away. But then he saw the address. 1247 Maple Grove Lane. His heart stopped. That was his house. His old house. The mansion he'd lost 3 decades ago. Robert sat down on a nearby bench, his hands shaking as he read the article. The city was planning to tear down several abandoned buildings in the historic district. His former home was on the list. He stared at the grainy photo of the property. Even covered in ivy and decay, he recognized every window, every corner of that roof. The memories came flooding back like a wave he couldn't stop. He'd been someone once. He'd worn expensive suits and driven a luxury car. He'd had a beautiful wife named Linda and 2 kids who called him Dad. That mansion had been filled with laughter and love, birthday parties in the backyard, Christmas mornings by the fireplace, family dinners around a table that could seat 12 people. Then it all fell apart. His business partner, a man named Richard, had betrayed him. Richard had been stealing from their real estate company for years, and when Robert started asking questions, Richard made it look like Robert was the thief. The evidence was solid. Too solid. Robert realized later that Richard had been planning it for months, maybe years. Bank accounts in Robert's name, forged signatures, fake documents. The legal battles drained everything. Every penny Robert had went to lawyers who promised they could prove his innocence. But Richard was smart. He'd covered his tracks too well. The judge didn't believe Robert's story. Who would? A successful businessman suddenly claiming his partner framed him. It sounded like a desperate lie. Then Linda died. She'd been driving home from the lawyer's office when another car ran a red light and hit her. The doctor said she died instantly. Robert was in jail when it happened, unable to even attend her funeral. That was the moment something inside him broke. Not bent, not cracked, completely shattered. His kids were taken away. Child services said he was unfit. A convicted criminal couldn't raise children. He never saw them again. By the time he got out of prison 2 years later, they'd been adopted by another family. The records were sealed. His parental rights had been terminated. Robert lost the mansion to foreclosure. Lost everything, really. His reputation was destroyed. No one would hire him. His family had disowned him. Friends disappeared. He started drinking to numb the pain. One bottle led to another. One bad decision led to the next. Before he knew it, he was living under a bridge with nothing but the clothes on his back. That was 30 years ago. Robert folded the newspaper carefully and tucked it into his cart. He'd taught himself not to think about the past. It hurt too much. But seeing that house again, even just in a photo, stirred something inside him, something he thought had died a long time ago. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at the shelter where Robert sometimes stayed. The volunteer at the front desk looked confused as she handed it to him. "This came for you, certified mail." Robert's hands trembled as he opened it. It was from a law firm downtown. He had to read it 3 times before it made sense. Due to some legal technicality in the foreclosure process from 30 years ago, Robert still had rights to inspect the property one final time before demolition. He had 2 weeks. He sat there staring at the letter for a long time. Why would he want to go back there? What good would it do to see the place where his life fell apart? Every happy memory in that house was now tied to everything he'd lost. Going back would be like reopening a wound that had barely healed. But something pulled at him, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was just the human need to say goodbye to the life he once had. Whatever it was, Robert found himself standing outside 1247 Maple Grove Lane 3 days later. The mansion looked like something from a horror movie. The once white paint was peeling and gray. Windows were broken. The yard that Linda had loved so much was completely overgrown with weeds taller than Robert's waist. The gate hung crooked on its hinges, creaking in the wind. Robert stood on the sidewalk for 20 minutes just staring. A younger couple walked past with their dog, giving him a wide berth. He knew what they saw: a homeless man with a cart standing in front of an abandoned house. They probably thought he was looking for a place to squat. If only they knew this homeless man used to own the place. Finally, Robert pushed open the gate. It groaned loudly, like it was protesting after years of silence. He walked up the cracked driveway, past the fountain that had long since stopped working. The front porch steps were rotting. He tested each one carefully before putting his full weight on it. The front door was locked, but Robert remembered there was always a spare key hidden under a fake rock near the rose bushes. He knelt down, pushing aside the dead plants, and incredibly, the rock was still there. His fingers closed around it, and he couldn't help but smile sadly. Linda had put that there after he'd locked himself out one too many times. The key was rusty, but it still turned. The door swung open with a loud creak that echoed through the empty halls. Robert stepped inside his old home for the first time in 30 years. The smell hit him first: dust and mold and decay. The air was thick with it. But underneath those smells, he could almost detect hints of the life that used to exist here. Linda's perfume, the lemon polish she used on the furniture, the scent of her famous pot roast that used to fill the whole house. Everything was covered in white sheets, like ghosts of furniture. Dust covered every surface in a thick layer. His footsteps left prints on the hardwood floor. It was like walking through a museum of his own life. A museum that no one had visited in decades. Robert walked through each room slowly. The living room where they'd watched TV as a family. The kitchen where Linda had taught their daughter how to make cookies. The dining room where they'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners. Every room held a memory. Every corner whispered of the life he'd lost. Then he noticed something odd. Fresh footprints in the dust. Not his. Someone else had been here. Recently. His heart started beating faster. He followed the trail of prints through the house. They led to his old office, and there on the floor was a sleeping bag, empty food containers, cigarette butts in a makeshift ashtray. Someone had been living in his house. Robert's mind raced. Squatters weren't uncommon in abandoned buildings, but something about this felt different. The sleeping bag was positioned where it had a view of both the office door and the window. The food was carefully hidden in a corner. Whoever was staying here didn't want to be found easily. Then Robert saw it. The door to the basement. It was open. In all the years he'd lived in this house, that door had always been locked. Always. Linda had insisted on it. She said the basement gave her the creeps. It was the one room she never wanted to go in. Robert had kept it locked to make her happy, but now it stood open, like an invitation, or a warning. Robert grabbed a flashlight from his cart. His hands were shaking. Every instinct told him to turn around and leave. Call the police. Let them handle it. But 30 years of having nothing left to lose had taught him not to fear much anymore. He descended the stairs into the darkness, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the shadows. The basement was bigger than he remembered, much bigger, and the walls were covered in something. As his eyes adjusted, Robert's blood ran cold. Newspaper clippings, hundreds of them, covering every inch of the walls, all of them about missing children from the 1990s. And right in the center was a huge article about his own kids disappearing after Linda died. Beneath it, written in handwriting that made his heart stop, were 4 words in Linda's writing. I know where they are. Robert couldn't move. He stood, frozen in the basement, staring at those 4 words written in Linda's handwriting. His wife had been dead for 30 years. How could her writing be on this wall? His mind struggled to make sense of what he was seeing. The flashlight beam shook in his trembling hand as he moved closer to examine the wall. The newspaper clippings were yellowed with age, carefully taped up in what looked like a timeline. Articles about children who had vanished without a trace. Kids who had been playing in their yards one moment and gone the next. Families torn apart by loss, just like his had been. But it was the dates that made his stomach turn. All of these disappearances happened during the same period, between 1993 and 1995. The same years when his life was falling apart. The same years when Linda had started acting strange. Robert remembered how she'd changed during those final months. She'd become secretive, always making phone calls she wouldn't explain. She'd started locking herself in the office for hours. He'd thought maybe she was having an affair, or that the stress of the legal troubles was getting to her. But what if it was something else entirely? He tore his eyes away from the wall and looked around the basement more carefully. That's when he noticed the far corner was different. The wall didn't quite match. The paint was a slightly different shade. Robert walked over and ran his hand along the surface. It was hollow. His heart pounded as he searched for a way to open it. There had to be a latch or a button somewhere. His fingers found a small depression in the wall, and when he pressed it, a section of the wall swung inward like a door. Behind it was a small room he'd never known existed. Robert stepped inside, and his flashlight revealed filing cabinets. Old VHS tapes stacked on shelves and dozens of notebooks. Everything was covered in dust, but it had been protected from the moisture that had damaged the rest of the basement. He pulled out one of the notebooks at random and opened it. Linda's handwriting filled every page. His hands shook as he read her words. Journal entries dated from 1993. Linda had been investigating something big. Robert sank down onto the floor, his back against the filing cabinet, and started reading from the beginning. The first entry was dated March 1993. Linda wrote about noticing something odd at one of the properties Robert's company managed, a vacant office building on the east side of town. She'd gone there to drop off some papers Robert had forgotten, and she'd seen people coming and going at strange hours, people who didn't look like they belonged there. At first she thought maybe squatters had moved in, but then she saw children, young kids being led into the building late at night. They looked scared. When Linda tried to ask Robert about it, he'd said the building was empty, scheduled for renovation. He had no idea anyone was using it. That's when Linda started to suspect something was very wrong. Robert's chest felt tight as he continued reading. Linda had started watching the building. She'd taken photos. She'd written down license plate numbers. She'd documented everything she saw, and the more she discovered, the more horrified she became. The children weren't just at one building. They were being moved between several properties. All of them owned or managed by the company Robert and Richard ran together. Linda realized that someone was using their real estate business as a cover for something terrible, something that made her sick to even write about. She'd started investigating Richard, following him, listening to his phone calls when she could, and what she found was worse than she'd imagined. Richard wasn't just embezzling money from the company. He was running an operation that hurt children. He was using empty buildings to hide them before moving them somewhere else. Linda's journal entries became more frantic as she pieced together the scope of what was happening. But here's what made Robert's blood run cold. Richard wasn't working alone. Linda had discovered that several important people in the city were involved. A judge, 2 police officers, a city council member, people with power who could make evidence disappear and keep anyone from asking too many questions. That's when Linda realized how dangerous her investigation had become. Robert found an entry dated September 1995, just 2 weeks before Linda died. She wrote that she'd gathered enough evidence to take to the FBI. She had photos, recordings, documents, everything she needed to bring down the entire operation. But she was scared. She knew these people would do anything to protect themselves. The entry ended with a single line that made Robert's heart break all over again. If something happens to me, Robert will know where to find this. He has to finish what I started, but Robert never knew. He'd been so focused on fighting the embezzlement charges that he'd never thought to search the house. He'd never known about the hidden room or Linda's investigation. And after Linda died and he went to prison, he'd lost access to everything. Robert sat in the darkness of that hidden room, tears streaming down his face. Linda hadn't been having an affair. She hadn't been pulling away from him. She'd been trying to save children. She'd been risking her own life to stop something evil, and she'd died for it. The car accident that killed her suddenly made sense. It wasn't random. It was planned. They'd killed her to keep her quiet. And the charges against Robert? They'd probably been Richard's way of discrediting him, making sure that if Robert ever found Linda's evidence, no one would believe a convicted criminal. It was all connected, all part of the same nightmare. Robert forced himself to stand up. His legs felt weak, but he had to keep looking. He opened the filing cabinets and found folders organized by date. Each one contained photos, notes, and printed emails Linda had somehow gotten access to. She'd been meticulous. Everything was documented and cross-referenced. Then he found the VHS tapes. There were dozens of them, each labeled with dates and locations. Robert's hands shook as he held one. These had to be security camera footage. Linda must have figured out how to access the cameras at the buildings, but Robert had no way to watch them. He needed a VCR, and those were hard to find these days. He'd have to figure that out later. He kept searching through the room, and that's when he found the folder labeled with his children's names. His breath caught in his throat as he opened it. Inside were official-looking documents, transfer papers from child services, adoption records, but something was wrong with them. The signatures didn't match. The dates were inconsistent. Linda had written notes in the margins. Forged? Check these names. This judge is on Richard's payroll. Robert's world tilted. His kids hadn't been legally adopted. The paperwork was fake, which meant they'd been taken. Taken by the same people who killed Linda. Taken to make sure Robert would never fight back, never ask questions. They'd used his own children as leverage to keep him broken. He found one more note in Linda's handwriting, dated the day before she died. I found them. Both kids are alive. They're being moved next week. I have to stop this now. Meeting with FBI contact tomorrow at 2 p.m. Can't wait any longer. But Linda never made it to that meeting. She died at 11 a.m. the next morning. Robert sat surrounded by his dead wife's investigation, and for the first time in 30 years, he felt something other than despair. He felt anger. Pure white-hot anger at the people who'd destroyed his family, who'd killed his wife, who'd taken his children and let him think he'd lost them forever. His kids had been alive this whole time. Maybe they still were. Robert carefully started gathering the most important documents. He needed to get this evidence somewhere safe. He needed to figure out how to watch those tapes. He needed to understand exactly what Linda had discovered. That's when he heard footsteps upstairs. Someone else was in the house. Robert quickly turned off his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall. His heart hammered in his chest. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. Someone searching room by room, getting closer to the basement stairs. He held his breath as the footsteps reached the top of the basement stairs and stopped. Silence. Then a voice called down into the darkness. I know you're down there. Robert. We need to talk. It was a young man's voice, maybe in his 30s. There was something familiar about it, but Robert couldn't place it. Who are you? Robert called back, his voice rougher than he'd expected. There was a pause. Then the voice said something that made Robert's legs almost give out beneath him. It's me, Dad. It's your son. I've been waiting 30 years for you to come home. Robert's mind reeled. His son would be 38 now. The voice could be the right age. But how was this possible? How did his son even know he was here? Come up slowly, the voice said. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help. We need to finish what Mom started. Robert's hand shook as he picked up his flashlight and the folder of documents. Every instinct screamed that this could be a trap. But what if it was real? What if his son was really alive and standing at the top of those stairs? He had nothing left to lose anyway. Robert climbed the stairs slowly, one hand holding the documents, the other holding the flashlight like a weapon. As he reached the top, the beam of light fell on a man standing in the hallway. He was tall and lean with Robert's same dark hair, though streaked with early gray. But it was the eyes that convinced him. Those were Linda's eyes. Kind and intelligent and filled with pain that came from seeing too much. Tommy, Robert whispered, using his son's childhood name. The man nodded, and Robert saw tears streaming down his face. Yeah, Dad, it's me. We have so much to talk about. Robert stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the man who claimed to be his son. 30 years of grief and loss stood between them like a wall. Tommy had been 8 years old the last time Robert held him. Now he was a grown man with lines around his eyes and shoulders that carried the weight of secrets. "I know this is a lot," Tommy said quietly, keeping his distance like he was afraid Robert might run. "I've imagined this moment for so long, but now that it's here, I don't know where to start." Robert's throat was so tight he could barely speak. "Are you real? Is this really happening?" Tommy reached into his jacket pocket slowly, pulling out an old photograph. He handed it to Robert. It was a picture of their family at Tommy's 7th birthday party. Robert remembered Linda taking that photo. Tommy was wearing a paper crown and had frosting on his nose. Robert's younger self was laughing in the background. "I've kept this with me every single day," Tommy said. "It's the only thing they let me keep from my old life." Robert's hands trembled as he held the photo. "What happened to you? Where have you been all these years?" Tommy's jaw clenched. "We should sit down. This is going to take a while." They moved to what used to be the living room. Tommy pushed aside some of the dusty sheets covering the old furniture, and they sat across from each other. In the dim light coming through the broken windows, Robert studied his son's face, trying to match it with the child he remembered. "After Mom died and you went to prison, they came for us," Tommy began. "Child services, or at least people who said they were from child services. They separated me and Katie immediately. Said it would be easier to place us in foster homes if we weren't together. I was 8. She was only 6. Robert felt like someone was squeezing his heart. "Katie, she's alive," Tommy said quickly. "I found her about 6 months ago, but I'll get to that." Tommy took a deep breath and continued. "They didn't take us to a foster home. They took us to one of those empty buildings Mom had been investigating. I remember being so scared. There were other kids there, all of them looking as terrified as I felt. We were only there for a few days, but it felt like forever. Then one night something went wrong. I heard shouting, people running. Later I found out it was a police raid, but not the kind meant to help us. It was Richard and his people clearing out because they'd gotten a tip that real cops were coming. In the chaos, I managed to get away." Robert leaned forward. "You escaped? At 8 years old?" Tommy nodded. "I hid in a dumpster until morning. Then I just started walking. I was terrified they'd find me, so I kept moving. I ended up at a church downtown. The priest there, Father Miguel, he was a good man. He could tell something was wrong, but instead of calling the police like he should have, he listened to me. When I told him men had taken me and my sister, that my mom was dead and my dad was in prison, he did something incredible. He believed me. He said he'd heard rumors about children disappearing, about people in power being involved. So he hid me." Robert's eyes widened. "He hid you? For how long?" 3 years, Tommy said. "He kept me in a small room in the church rectory, taught me himself so I wouldn't fall behind in school. He was risking everything to protect me, but he was also teaching me something else. He was teaching me to be patient, to wait for the right moment. He said if Richard and his people thought I was gone, truly gone, they'd stop looking. And if they stopped looking, eventually I could start looking for them." Tommy's voice grew harder. "When I was 11, Father Miguel got sick. Cancer. Before he died, he made arrangements with a family he trusted. They took me in, gave me a new identity, raised me as their own. But they knew the truth and they supported what I needed to do." "What did you need to do?" Robert asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Finish what Mom started," Tommy said simply. "Find Katie, bring down everyone involved. Make them pay for what they did to our family." Tommy stood up and started pacing. "I spent my teenage years learning everything I could. Computers, surveillance, investigation techniques. The family that adopted me, the Johnsons, they had connections. Mr. Johnson had been a private investigator before he retired. He taught me everything he knew. When I turned 18, I started actively investigating. I broke into old records, hacked into systems I probably shouldn't mention. I found some of Mom's contacts, people she'd been working with before she died. Turns out she'd sent copies of some of her evidence to a journalist she trusted, but he'd been too scared to publish it after Mom died. He still had everything, though. Robert felt dizzy trying to take it all in. And Katie? Tommy's expression softened and hardened at the same time. That was the hardest part. They'd moved her far away, given her a completely new identity. Her memories of her childhood were either erased or buried deep. Trauma does that sometimes, especially to young kids. I found her 6 months ago living in Oregon. She's a school teacher. Goes by the name Beth Callahan now. Does she know? Robert whispered. Does she know about us? About what happened? Tommy shook his head. I haven't approached her yet. I've been watching from a distance, making sure she's safe. But here's the thing, Dad. These people, Richard's network, they're still operating. Richard died 10 years ago, but his son David took over. They've gotten smarter, more careful, but they're still out there. And if they find out Katie is alive and has a brother who's been investigating them, they'll go after her. So I've been waiting, building my case, gathering more evidence. I tracked down several of the kids who were taken back then. Some of them don't remember anything. Some remember too much. A few have been willing to talk to me, to add their testimony to what I'm building. Tommy pulled out a USB drive from his pocket. I've got everything on here. Mom's original investigation combined with everything I've found over the last 20 years. Bank records showing David's money laundering operation, communications between him and people in the government, photos and videos, testimonies from survivors. It's airtight, but here's why I needed you, Tommy continued. You still legally own several of the properties they're using. The foreclosure on this house wasn't technically complete due to a filing error, and there are 3 other buildings that were in your name personally, not the company's name. Legally, they're still yours. Robert's mind was reeling. I don't understand. What good does that do? It means we can create a legal trap, Tommy explained. If you transfer those properties to law enforcement as part of an investigation, they can raid all the locations simultaneously. David won't have time to clear them out. We can catch them in the act. But there's a problem, Tommy said, his expression darkening. David knows you're back. The letter from the law firm about this house? That triggered alerts in his monitoring system. He's got people everywhere, Dad. Government officials, judges, cops. He knows you're here and he knows I'm here too. We've been careful, but we're running out of time. Robert felt cold fear creeping up his spine. What do we do? I've been working with an FBI agent named Torres. She's clean, I've vetted her thoroughly. She's been trying to build a case against David for 3 years, but hasn't had enough evidence to move. What we have changes everything. But we need to move fast. Tommy pulled out a phone and checked it. His face went pale. Dad, we need to go now. What's wrong? I've got alerts set up around Katie's house in Oregon. Someone just pulled up outside. Black SUV, 2 men. David's people. Robert felt his heart stop. They found her? The FBI has an agent watching her too, but we need to call Torres immediately. If they're moving on Katie, it means David knows we're close to exposing him. He's going to try to eliminate any evidence and anyone who can testify against him. Tommy was already dialing, talking rapidly to someone on the other end. Robert heard him giving addresses, explaining the situation. His mind was stuck on the image of his daughter, the little girl he hadn't seen in 30 years, in danger because of all this. Torres is scrambling a team to Katie's location right now, Tommy said, hanging up. But she needs us to come in. We need to give her everything, make our official statements, transfer the property deeds. It's happening tonight, Dad. Everything Mom worked for, everything I've spent my life preparing for, it's all coming together right now. Robert stood up, his legs shaky. For 30 years he'd been invisible, powerless, a ghost drifting through the streets. But suddenly he mattered again. His signature, his testimony, his willingness to stand up could bring down the people who'd destroyed his family. Let's go, Robert said. Tell me what to do. Tommy grabbed his arm. Dad, you need to understand. Once we do this, there's no going back. David is going to come after us with everything he has. His lawyers, his connections, everything. Your life is about to get complicated again. Are you sure you're ready? Robert thought about Linda, dead for 30 years because she'd tried to do the right thing. He thought about Tommy, who'd spent his entire adult life seeking justice. He thought about Katie, living under a false name, robbed of her true identity and her family. I've been ready for 30 years, Robert said. I just didn't know it. They were heading for the door when Tommy's phone buzzed again. He looked at it and his face went white. What? Robert asked. Tommy showed him the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number. There was a photo attached. It showed Katie walking into her apartment building. The message below it read, "Nice reunion, Robert. But family time is over. You have 2 hours to bring me everything Linda collected and everything your son has gathered. The old Wellington Properties warehouse on Harbor Street. Come alone, both of you, or Katie doesn't see tomorrow morning." Robert and Tommy stared at each other. The trap was closing around them and they had a choice to make. Follow David's orders and probably walk into a death trap, or trust the FBI to reach Katie in time while they finished what they started. "What do we do?" Robert whispered. Tommy's hands were shaking as he replied, "We trust Agent Torres, and we finish this, tonight." Agent Torres met them at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the FBI field office. She was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When she saw Robert, her expression softened slightly. "Mr. Wellington, I've read a lot about your case over the years. I'm sorry for what happened to you." Robert just nodded. He didn't trust his voice. Tommy laid out everything on the table between them. The USB drive, copies of Linda's journals, the threatening text message. Torres listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious with each detail. "We have eyes on your daughter's location," Torres said, checking her phone. 2 agents are positioned nearby. The men in the SUV are still outside her building, but they haven't made a move. They're just watching. "For now," Tommy said grimly. But David's message was clear. "We have 2 hours." Torres looked at her watch. "It's 9:47 now. That gives us until 11:47. Here's what I need. First, Mr. Wellington, I need you to sign these property transfer documents. This gives us legal authority to enter those buildings. Second, I need both of you to give your official statements. Everything you know, everything you've witnessed." "That'll take more than 2 hours," Robert said. "We'll do abbreviated statements now, full depositions later. The priority is getting enough to move tonight. My team has been ready for weeks, waiting for solid evidence against David. What you've brought me is beyond what I'd hoped for." Torres pulled out a laptop and started typing rapidly. "I'm mobilizing units to 4 locations. The warehouse where David wants you to meet him, plus 3 properties that show active use based on Tommy's surveillance. We hit them all simultaneously at midnight. David won't have time to cover his tracks. What about Katie?" Robert asked, his voice cracking on his daughter's name. "We're moving her to protective custody within the hour. She won't know what's happening at first, but we'll explain everything once she's secure. She'll be confused and probably scared, but she'll be safe." Tommy leaned forward. "David isn't stupid. He'll have contingency plans. If he realizes we're not coming to the warehouse, if he gets wind of the raids being planned, he'll disappear. He's got resources and connections we might not know about." Torres met his eyes. "That's why we're going to give him what he wants." "Sort of." Robert felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "You 2 are going to that warehouse," Torres said. "But you'll be wired, and you'll have a full tactical team in position around the building. We need David on record making threats, admitting to his operation. We need him to incriminate himself." "You want us to walk into a trap?" Tommy said flatly. "I want you to turn his trap into ours," Torres replied. "Look, I understand if you're not willing. We can still do the raids, still make arrests, but David is smart enough to insulate himself. His lawyers will claim he had no knowledge of what was happening in those buildings. We need him to admit his involvement directly. We need him to threaten you, to reveal what he knows. And for that, we need you to meet with him." Robert and Tommy looked at each other. Robert could see the fear in his son's eyes, but also the determination. This was what Tommy had been working toward for 20 years, a chance to look the people who destroyed their family in the eye and bring them to justice. "We'll do it," Robert said. Tommy nodded. "But we want assurances. Katie stays protected no matter what happens to us, and if this goes sideways, your team moves immediately." "You have my word," Torres said. She stood up. "We have 90 minutes. Let's get you both wired up and briefed." The next hour passed in a blur. Robert and Tommy were fitted with recording devices so small Robert could barely feel them. Torres's team reviewed blueprints of the warehouse, established positions, ran through scenarios. Robert tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting to Katie, his daughter who didn't even know he existed. Who might hate him for the chaos this was about to bring into her life? "You okay, Dad?" Tommy asked quietly while the tech team made final adjustments to their equipment. "I never stopped being your father," Robert said. "Not once in 30 years. I want you to know that. Every day on those streets I thought about you and Katie. I just never thought I'd get the chance to tell you." Tommy's eyes were wet. "I knew. Even when I was a kid hiding in that church, I knew you didn't abandon us. Mom's journals made that clear. She loved you, Dad. Everything she did was to protect us, to protect you. She knew Richard was setting you up, but she died before she could prove it. She was braver than all of us," Robert said. At 11:30, Torres gathered them for final instructions. The warehouse is empty except for David and however many people he brings with him. My team will have the building surrounded, but they won't move until I give the signal. Your job is to keep David talking. Get him to admit what he's done. Get him to explain his operation. The longer he talks, the more evidence we have. What if he just shoots us? Tommy asked bluntly. He won't, Torres said with certainty. He wants something from you. He wants Linda's evidence destroyed. And he wants to know what you've gathered over the years. He needs to assess the threat before he eliminates it. That gives us time. Robert wasn't as confident, but he didn't have a better plan. They drove to the warehouse in separate cars, Tommy in his old sedan, Robert in an FBI vehicle with tinted windows. The warehouse district was dark and quiet at this time of night. Old buildings that had once housed thriving businesses now stood empty. Monuments to a city that had moved on. The Wellington Properties warehouse loomed ahead. A 3-story concrete structure with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. A single black car was parked out front. David was already there. Tommy and Robert parked and walked toward the main entrance together. The door was unlocked. Inside, a single light illuminated the vast empty space, and standing in the center of that space was a man in an expensive suit. David Hayes was in his early 50s, well-groomed, looking more like a corporate executive than a criminal. Robert Wellington, David said, his voice echoing in the empty space. You're looking rough. I guess 30 years on the streets will do that to a person. Where's our daughter? Tommy demanded. David smiled. Safe for now. Whether she stays that way depends on you. Did you bring everything? We want to see proof she's okay first, Robert said, finding his voice. David pulled out his phone and played a video. It showed Katie in her apartment, visible through a window. She was cooking dinner, completely unaware she was being watched. The timestamp showed it was recorded 15 minutes ago. As you can see, she's fine. My people are very close by. All it takes is one phone call from me and she stops being fine. So let's not play games. Where's the evidence? Tommy held up the USB drive. It's all here. Everything Mom collected, everything I've found. You can have it. Just leave Katie alone, David laughed. You think I'm stupid? I know that's not the only copy. You've been investigating me for years, Tommy. Yes, I know all about you. I've known for a while now. I let you dig because I wanted to know what you'd find, who you'd talk to. You've been very useful. So what do you want? Robert asked. I want you both dead, David said simply. I want every copy of that evidence destroyed. I want every person who might testify against me too scared to speak. And I want to make sure this family stops being a problem for me. My father made mistakes with you, Robert. He left loose ends. I don't make those mistakes. 2 men stepped out from the shadows behind David. Both were armed. But first, David continued, I want to know everything. Who have you talked to? What agencies? What evidence did you actually find? Because you see, I've spent the last 20 years building something much bigger than what my father started, and I need to know exactly what threats I'm dealing with before I clean them up. Tommy met Robert's eyes. They both knew this was it. This was the moment when David would either incriminate himself completely or realize he'd said too much and end this quickly. Your father killed my wife, Robert said, keeping his voice steady. He framed me, destroyed my life, and took my children. And you continued his work. You've hurt countless families. It's over, David. David's smile faded. It's not over until I say it's over. Start talking or I make the call about Katie. But before anyone could say another word, David's phone rang. He glanced at it and his face changed. Something was wrong. What do you mean, FBI? They could hear David saying into the phone. Where? How many locations? Robert and Tommy stepped back as David's expression turned from confusion to rage. He looked at them with pure hatred. You set me up, David hissed. You're wearing wires right now, aren't you? The 2 armed men raised their weapons. Robert felt time slow down. He'd survived 30 years on the streets. He'd survived losing everything, but he wasn't sure he'd survive the next few seconds. Then the warehouse doors exploded inward and Agent Torres's voice boomed through a megaphone. FBI, drop your weapons. David Hayes, you're under arrest. What happened next was chaos. David's men dropped their guns immediately, but David ran. Agents poured into the warehouse from every direction. Robert and Tommy hit the ground as they'd been instructed to do. Someone tackled David before he made it 10 feet, and just like that, it was over. Torres helped Robert to his feet. We got everything. Every word. and the raids at the other locations were successful. We've arrested 17 people so far, including a judge and 3 police officers. It's going to be a long night of processing, but we got them. Katie? Tommy asked urgently. Torres smiled. Safe. My agents have her at a secure location. She's demanding to know what's going on, but she's safe. Robert felt his legs give out. Tommy caught him. Father and son held each other up as federal agents swarmed around them, as David Hayes was read his rights, as 3 decades of pain finally came to an end. 3 days after the arrests, Robert sat in a small conference room at the FBI field office waiting to meet his daughter. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He'd faced down David Hayes in that warehouse with less fear than he felt right now. Agent Torres had explained that Katie, who still went by Beth, had been told everything. About her real identity, about her parents, about what had happened 30 years ago. Torres said Katie had taken it better than expected, but Robert wasn't sure what that meant. How did someone take news like that well? Tommy sat beside him, equally nervous. She might not want to see us, he said quietly. We need to be prepared for that. Her whole life just got turned upside down. I know, Robert said. I just need her to know we never stopped loving her, that we never wanted to lose her. The door opened and Agent Torres walked in, followed by a woman with Linda's eyes and Robert's dark hair. She was beautiful. She was his daughter, and she was looking at him like she wasn't sure if he was real. Katie, Robert whispered, then corrected himself. Beth, I'm sorry. Whatever name you want, that's who you are. Katie stood frozen in the doorway. Her eyes moved between Robert and Tommy, searching for something. Recognition, maybe, or proof that this wasn't some elaborate lie. They showed me pictures, she said finally. Her voice was soft but steady. From when I was little. There's a photo of me on your shoulders at a park. I'm eating cotton candy and laughing. I don't remember that day, but when I saw the picture, I felt something. Like my heart remembered even though my mind didn't. Tommy stood up slowly. That was at the spring festival. You were 5. You made Dad ride the carousel 7 times because you loved the purple horse. Katie's eyes filled with tears. They took everything from me. My memories, my family, my name. I've spent my whole life feeling like something was missing. Like I wasn't complete. Now I know why. Robert took a tentative step forward. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry you grew up without knowing who you really were. But you need to know that every single day for 30 years I thought about you. I never stopped being your father even when I thought I'd never see you again. Katie wiped her eyes. They told me you were homeless, that you've been living on the streets all this time. I gave up, Robert admitted. I lost everything and I gave up. That was my choice and my failure. But Tommy never gave up. He spent his whole life looking for you, working to bring down the people who hurt us. He's the hero in this story. Tommy shook his head. Mom was the hero. She's the one who started all this. She died trying to save children she'd never even met. Children like us. Katie looked at Tommy. My brother. I have a brother. You do, Tommy said, his voice breaking. And I've missed you every day since they took us. Katie took a shaky breath. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to suddenly have a family after 34 years of being alone. My adoptive parents, the Callahans, they loved me, but I always felt like I didn't quite fit. Now I know why. But I don't know how to just suddenly become Katie Wellington again. You don't have to, Robert said quickly. You can be Beth Callahan. You can be whoever you want to be. We're not asking you to change your life or pretend the last 30 years didn't happen. We're just asking for a chance to be part of your life now, however that looks. Whatever you're comfortable with. Torres spoke up from near the door. Katie, there's no pressure here. You can take all the time you need to process this. Your family just wants you to know they're here now. They're not going anywhere. Katie nodded slowly. Then she did something that made Robert's heart nearly burst. She walked over to him and stopped just a few feet away, studying his face carefully. I see it now, she said softly. I have your eyes. And your nose. I always wondered where I got that slightly crooked nose. She gave a small, watery laugh. You got that from me, Robert said, tears streaming down his face. I broke it playing baseball when I was 12. Your grandmother said I was too stubborn to go to the doctor, so it healed crooked. Katie reached out tentatively and touched his hand. Just that small contact, that simple touch, made 30 years of pain worth surviving. Robert didn't dare move, afraid she'd pull away. But she didn't. She held his hand and looked at Tommy. "Come here," she said to her brother. The three of them stood together in that small conference room, holding hands, crying. A family that had been torn apart was taking its first small steps toward healing. Over the next few months, the legal proceedings moved forward. David Hayes and 16 others were charged with numerous crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Tommy's years of investigation, combined with Linda's original documentation and the recordings from the warehouse confrontation, built an ironclad case. Robert's conviction was officially overturned. The judge who'd presided over his original trial had been on Richard's payroll, and new evidence proved Robert had been framed. His record was cleared. After 30 years, his name meant something good again. The settlement from the wrongful conviction lawsuit was substantial. Robert's lawyers told him he'd won more than $3 million. It was money that should have felt important, but Robert found he cared less about it than he would have expected. What mattered was the foundation they created with that money. Tommy suggested they name it after Linda, the Linda Wellington Foundation for Missing Children. Its mission was to help find missing kids and support survivors of trafficking. Robert poured everything into making it work. The old mansion was renovated, but not for Robert to live in. He couldn't imagine rattling around in that big house alone. Instead, it became the foundation's headquarters. The basement where Linda had hidden her investigation was converted into a resource center. The walls that had once held newspaper clippings about missing children now held photos of children who'd been found and reunited with their families. Robert found a small apartment nearby. It was simple and modest, but it was his. He'd spent 30 years sleeping under bridges and in shelters. Having his own place, even a small one, felt like a luxury beyond measure. Tommy moved back to the city and took a position running the foundation. His years of investigation skills made him perfect for coordinating with law enforcement and following leads on missing children cases. He was good at it. More than that, he'd found purpose and peace in turning his pain into something that helped others. Katie took longer to adjust to everything. She kept her job as a teacher in Oregon at first, but visited every few weeks. Slowly, over months of therapy and gentle family dinners, she started to remember fragments of her childhood. The purple horse on the carousel, making cookies with Linda in the kitchen, playing hide-and-seek in the mansion's many rooms. A year after the arrest, Katie made a decision. She moved back to the city and took a position at a school near the foundation's headquarters. She kept the name Beth professionally, but with family, she let them call her Katie. She said she felt like she was both people now. Beth, who'd built a life on her own, and Katie, who was learning to be part of a family again. Robert's favorite day of the week became Sunday. That's when the three of them had dinner together. Sometimes at Tommy's place, sometimes at Katie's small house, sometimes at Robert's apartment. They'd cook together, stumbling through Linda's old recipes that Tommy had found in her journals. They talked about everything. Katie shared stories about her years growing up as Beth. Tommy talked about his investigation and the people who'd helped him along the way. Robert tried to find ways to talk about his years on the streets without making it sound too dark. Some stories were funny in a grim sort of way. Some were just sad, but they built something together. Not the family they used to be. That family was gone, destroyed by Richard Hayes and his terrible choices. This was a new family, forged from loss and pain, but strengthened by survival and love. On the first anniversary of David Hayes' arrest, the foundation held a gala fundraiser. Robert stood at the podium in a rented suit that didn't quite fit right, looking out at a room full of supporters. His hands shook a little, but Tommy and Katie stood beside him, and that gave him strength. 31 years ago, Robert began, my wife started an investigation that cost her life. She did it because she believed children deserved to be safe, that families deserve to stay together, that evil should be exposed and stopped no matter the personal cost. She didn't get to finish her work, but my son did. He spent his entire adult life building on what she started, and now my daughter has joined us in continuing that mission. This foundation exists because 3 decades ago, a brave woman decided to fight back, because a determined young man refused to give up, and because even in the darkest times, love doesn't die. It just waits for the chance to come home.